everybody. My name is David Garner, and I'm chairing the event today. I'm a former journalist. I worked as a journalist for 30 years before coming to the University of York to work in the communications office, and I retired as head of media relations here about 9 years ago. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here today. You've already been welcomed on the video, but I'd just like to reiterate that welcome. Before I introduce you to the speaker, I need to run through some housekeeping. In the very unlikely event of an emergency, please follow the steward's instructions and leave the venue by the nearest available exit. And could I also ask you to put your phones on silent for the session. Our speaker today is Daniel Gray, a writer and broadcaster and editor of Nutmeg magazine. Some of you may have attended the Delights of Football event here yesterday, at which Daniel treated us to some highly entertaining and often poignant readings from his football books, of which he's written several, including Saturday 3 p.m. and The Silence of the Stands. The latter was shortlisted for the Sunday Times Football Book of the Year award and longlisted for the William Hill Prize. He writes on social history and travel as well, and his book Food of the Cods, How Fish and Chips Made Britain, was shortlisted for the Fortnum and Mason and Food Writers Guild Awards. He's written for most UK newspapers and presented history on television, regularly talking and has regularly talked about social history and football on radio. As if that wasn't enough, he's also the presenter of the When Saturday Comes podcast. But today, appropriately on a Sunday, he is going to talk to us about his latest book, Sunday Best, Travels Through the Day of Rest. And just to let you know, he'll talk to you and do some readings from the book for a few minutes. I'll have a conversation with him for a few minutes, and then there'll be a few minutes at the end for questions from the audience. So without further ado, as they say, over to Daniel.
Thanks, David, and thanks so much. Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for coming. Yesterday, a lot of the readings were about a book, as mentioned, that I wrote called Saturday 3 p.m, but it started at 3:15, which confused some people. So thankfully, I can confirm it is Sunday today, in case you were in doubt, and thankfully that they've chosen today to do this event. This was a book I wanted to write for several years. I wasn't quite sure what the book was, but I just felt there was an idea in it, and it came to me for several reasons. One being that I was doing some work in Stornoway in the Isle of Lewis, and I happened to be there on a Sunday, and man, was it still a Sunday there, unlike what we've got used to, where things have modernised a lot more and opened up. And it just took me immediately back to growing up on the closed Sundays of Cotmanthorpe, near this very city, in the 1990s, and which we'll come on to again, and just thinking about the nature of Sunday, and then how it came to be such a different day to the other 6 days and have a very strong identity to it, whether positive or negative, whether relaxing or boring. And I wanted to delve into the social history of whether, obviously the church played a big part in that, but all of the different customs and laws that made Sunday what it was. And nostalgia played a part as well. Some of the best days of my life were playing football on a Sunday morning and then going to my grandma's for a roast. And if we'd thrashed a team that morning, she would inevitably say, "Who are you playing? Blind school?" Nearly every week. And then home for the standard theme tunes of Last of the Summer Wine and Bath Time and all those things, and the sudden doom that you've not done your homework. But it just there's enough in that for a writer to really to realise that people share those feelings as well. And so these things come together, and you suddenly feel there's probably a book in this, and then trying to ask myself what a Sunday is now and what's a typical Sunday now. So going to different things that I consider to be Sunday activities, whether it be the obvious things like church, but also going to things like I went to the Greyhounds in this, not a universally popular sport these days, but the Greyhounds was one of the few working class sports that was allowed on a Sunday. I found joy in my research, so went and did that, and just really asking myself what was a typical Sunday now, what had Sunday become. So I'll read from a couple of those place visits, and I'll begin like good Sundays should, not in church, but a car boot sale. So this takes place just close to Morpeth in Northumberland. "How much for your sexy poker?" asked the pensioner in a broad Northumbrian accent. Using his metal walking stick as a pointer, he gestured downwards towards a battered green and white box of 1970s playing cards with that title. The stick's rubber stopper made light contact with the box's negligee-wearing cover star. "Give us a pound for it," replied the stall-keeper, who until that point had been tucking into a sandwich with gusto as if riffing on a blues harmonica. The pensioner shook his head and shuffled away. Mild arousal had its budgetary limits. In declining to haggle, though, at least he had retained his dignity. Sexy poker would remain on the gravel, alongside a truly haunting porcelain clown and a hardback manual entitled Industrial Adhesives and Sealants. All items were flanked by a tatty jigsaw of a similar vintage to the cards. Investing in the idea that all 1,400 of its pieces were still present was a ginormous leap of faith, even for the Lord's Day. Me, sexy pokerman, and around 50 other browsers had all paid £5 for early entry to the Tranwell Sunday morning car boot sale, staged on a World War II RAF base just outside Morpeth. We filed between trestle tables congested with chipped vases and wooden mallets, and stooped over tarpaulin sheets of handbags and Barbie dolls, lying unloved as if cast aside in paupers' graves. Our feet crunched on the broken asphalt of a runway from which bombers had taken off so that recruits could be trained in air gunnery. Had the 20-something man now vigorously inspecting a 1960s black and white television looked beyond its bulk, he might just have spotted a derelict aircraft hangar or an air raid shelter. Somewhere hereabouts, perhaps beneath the burger van with its slogan of "Live it, love it, eat it," were the remains too of an underground control room. This combination of wartime reminders and a young woman from Pegswood selling a framed call bell accompanied by the words "Ring for champagne," £3, less than it cost us to make it, hinny, seemed for a giddy moment or two to be the very essence of modern Britain. Although car boot sales do take place on other days of the week, most remain a Sunday pursuit. Quite simply, they suit Sundays. There is the unhurried pace at which buyers slip between stalls as if time itself has been suspended. The way they drowsily peruse items, sifting through 7-inch singles or forensically examining wooden spirit levels, and the laissez-faire manner in which sellers display their wares, thinking nothing of placing, to use an example from Tranwell, a well-used bra next to a Princess Diana figurine, with both items guarded by a rusty saw. Here is a distant and languid mini-society, far removed from Friday big shops and errands requiring lists. I bought an ice cream from Mr. Softy, possibly not his real name, and stood observing my fellow browsers. No one rushed and everyone sauntered, loitered and dawdled. Bargain-hunting female friends in their 60s and 70s, shopping bags at the ready, wobbled happily between stalls, arm in arm. They stopped every few metres for another gossip, all, I've heard Connie's legs are bad again," and "I saw you Davy in his new car the other day." Antique items on stalls were, to them, interactive museum pieces rekindling faded times. "By Christ, our dad had one of them." Young hagglers, like the bicycle barterer I'd seen earlier, nodded to them and received greetings back. A few polite seconds later, stage whisper comments were offered. "I see he's got tattoos on his legs and all. It's a shame." There were couples absent-mindedly content in their shared silences, killing hours until coffee and cake. The husband in one such duo inquired about the price of a shopping trolley perched by a table. "That's not for sale, that's mine, pet," exclaimed an old lady next to him, prompting throaty laughter from the browser's wife. It was immediately possible to imagine her telling this story for the rest of the week and in a year's time. While that pair had been lovingly mocking one another for, say, nigh on half a century, here too were young couples seeking fittings to make a new rental flat a home or furniture to upcycle and sell on, their projects inspired by television programmes. Altogether, this temporary community felt blissfully apart from the frenetic everyday, a peaceful and cheerful withdrawal from modern life. Perhaps that's what a Sunday should be. I wandered back to the sexy poker stall. The game was still there with no home to go to. Some of the models on its cards would have lived whole lives now. The 4 of diamonds, a grandma, the 9 of spades retired to Benidorm. Perhaps they even visited car boot sales. There were, after all, stories in all of these items. The flower-powered drinks flask in autumnal colours, the Christmas-themed rocking horse, the 1970s plates with paintings of tall ships, the cuckoo clock, the Singer sewing machine, even the terrifying outsized rabbit teddy bear had made a human happy at some point in time, and the dozen random remote television controls next to it being coveted and hogged. I began to ponder the life of those objects and the thousands dormant on other stalls. Who'd they belong to? What had been their path to lying on a crumbling runway in Northumberland? Were some the spoils of a granddad's house being turned upside down upon his passing, or a grandma's to pay a smidgen towards care home fees? And then humongous raindrops started to drop on my ice cream, a Morse code telling me to go home. So at that point, as I say, go home. I haven't lived in York for a long time, but I had to go to Cotmanthorpe again to see if a Sunday was still the same, so I'll read a little from that. What's the most bored that you've ever been? Some hated school lesson? When you swear the clock ticked in reverse, will leap forward as a candidate. A tedious film, play or sports match that left you questioning your relationship with the person who'd suggested your attendance, perhaps. This event, maybe I should put. Think at least a little beyond those soporific endeavours, however, and there's a high chance that you will land on a Sunday in childhood. Those Sundays were a stifling incarceration, even if we were outdoors. Over everything loomed a subdued mood and the sense that nothing was possible. Whole streets seemed to be abandoned, shops hermetically sealed, and homes corked shut like bottled ships. The ice cream van's chimes would not be heard. This day looked, sounded, and even smelled different, separate, aloof, heavy. A melancholic virus draped over everything, fusing with this lethargy. At some later portion of the day, our stomachs would begin to lurch as we thought of Monday and school and how we hadn't done our homework. I can walk the streets of where I lived and still feel those Sundays now. Cotmanthorpe, a village 5 miles outside York, is virtually unchanged. Revisiting on a modern Sunday, it could still be the mid-1990s, but for newer car models and house extensions. Uncannily, as I arrived to retrace my dullest afternoons, 4 teenage boys skulked by wearing bright shell-suit tops and Umbro jumpers, just as me and my friends had back then. The spectre of that decade's fashion choices is haunting us anew. Their appearance and recalling loafing around these very cul-de-sacs was a time machine. Instantly and vividly, I was back there. These stagnant days always took place in June or July. From August until May, there was football to occupy and nurture us, but over those 2 months, glossy sunshine presided over the scene, adding to our sluggishness. Everyone is faster beneath raindrops. It illuminated the grey pavement so that they resembled the static fuzz on redundant television channels and awarded road tarmac a charmless glint. To change the scene, we would bang the ends of our skateboards on drain covers or stamp our feet on cracks, summoning a herd of bewildered ants. Such hours demanded impromptu mischief and games like this. Across the village, kids could be found variously trying to start fires with magnifying glasses, lighting deodorant cans with matches and climbing lampposts. It's like an admission when you're here, Mum. Sorry about this. We had a pastime called drain golf, in which stones were kicked from distance towards grates. The number of shots it took to sink them totted up and scores kept. Great kudos was given for eliciting from the drain a plonk sound, a rare phenomenon in those arid hosepipe band summers. Occasionally, we even had with us an actual football, dribbled idly around the village as if in listless reenactment of some medieval bladder game. On we walked among comatose streets of detached houses and bungalows to nowhere in particular. Hardly a person or vehicle passed us, another parallel with the present. Today, as then, a Cotmanthorpe Sunday had the look, of a playmat after its toy cars are tidied away. Loved it, really. The third one I'll do. Nothing felt more Sunday to me than cricket, even though cricket's played on every day of the week. I had such strong memories of one thing to do on Copmanthorpe, which was going to watch the village team on a Sunday, a brilliant form of cricket where the fielders had a pint in one hand and a fag in the mouth, and they would just put the pint down to try and catch the ball. And so I went, like a good Yorkshireman, to watch Yorkshire at Scarborough. Hushed terraces of four-storey B&Bs and corner chippies delivered me to a pocket of Scarborough where polite applause and cries of "How's that?" talked over seagull shrieks. Marine Drive, a homely old cricket ground as unchanged as amusement arcade penny falls and crab sticks. Victorian turnstiles clanked, and after the dark of the entranceway came the pulsating lime glow of the cricket pitch. From the wooden terrace benches, the prim pavilion and the seated stands, 3,000 or 4,000 were watching Yorkshire going to bat against Gloucestershire. The sun blazed down, making the players in their whites glow celestially. The occasion immediately, intrinsically, had the feel of a grand day out. It was there in the sight of sugary tea being poured carefully from flasks and sandwiches being unfurled from their cling film bundles way before noon. And it was there in the presence of ice cream and chippy vans, a bookstall and foldable chairs brought from home. At the club shop, a son in his 40s bought a cushion and loudly explained that it was for his dad's sore arse. By a catering wagon, a queuing woman exclaimed, 4 types of hot dog sausage. I've seen it all now. Everyone was here. The old men in blazers, the holidaying families with restless kids in buggies, the groups of young lads on a liquid breakfast. All of it splashed upon me the happy sense of not wishing to be anywhere else on earth. I found a perch on the benches and looked around the ground following the boundary. Roof tiles announced tea room, a solid message of 2 simple words that conjured so much. Next came pot-bellied men snoozing in deck chairs, and beyond the realm of Marine Drive were fine views across the grooves of rooftops to the countryside. Yet that world seemed suddenly remote. It felt as though attending cricket was a withdrawal from normal life, which is perhaps one of the true meanings of a Sunday. Behind me, a group of people in their 60s were engaged in the type of aimless conversation ideal for a cricketing Sunday. "He texts me every morning about what she's wearing," said one of the men. "Who?" came a woman's reply. "Carol Kirkwood." "All right. He didn't like her in black the other day. Says he can't see a figure." "I had a thing for John Ketley," added another of the women. They broke off to applaud a shot by Yorkshire batsman Finlay Bean, which sailed through the air for a 6, almost amputating a seagull, then resumed listing their crushes on various television meteorologists. A stream of Gloucestershire bowlers tried to oust Bean and his partner at the crease, Adam Lythe. None could, and soon lunch was called, prompting a scramble for the chippy van queue and deliberations over multiple sausage types. In a world where the answer is usually no, it was truly delightful to see families and groups of friends now seeping onto the pitch and indulging in their own miniature games of cricket or strolling around the grass chatting. Over the tannoy, scores were relayed from Surrey and Sussex and Durham and Kent. It was comforting to think of similar Sundays being joyously frittered away beneath this same bulging sun across the land. Here was a pursuit that made it possible to sit still and stare into space, very often with wide smiles encroaching upon our weary weekday faces. When the match recommenced, Yorkshire continued to stockpile runs. I'd moved to an area of the benches with better access to the bar. Here, 2 old mates from Sheffield discussed the difficulty of pronouncing oolaroops in their accents, and in a jotter, a lone man noted every run made and over bowled. A deal whereby 3 cricket tops could be bought for 20 quid at the stadium shop was announced over the tannoy, creating a shuffled stampede in which Yorkshire thriftiness came up against dodgy knees and spent backs. Unflinching throughout, a suited man slouched in a camping chair reading the Sunday Times. Noticing him, and so many dozing others, it struck me as refreshing in a time of frenzied box set binging that there is no obligation to watch every second of a cricket match, even if you're actually there. Contented quiet swarmed around us as sandwiches settled and Yorkshire continued to notch runs with not a single man lost. There was hypnotic bliss in what could be heard. the swishes of opening lager cans, the tups and puts and plinks and donks of bats striking ball, the occasional desperate appeals of "How's that?" from Gloucestershire's forlorn players, single lines of conversation drifting over on the wind. "That's the thing, John," said a man near me. "Ever since the Normans, we've been a nation of pissheads." I don't know any of the context of that, but it's one of those lines that go straight in your notebook. Finally, with Yorkshire having amassed 307 runs, a visiting fielder caught a lofty bean shot. A pocket of West Country visitors, hitherto unseen and unheard, roared. "Come on, Shire, turn the screw!" blasted a sonorous voice. "Shut up, bloody southerner," replied another. Late afternoon drifted into early evening, and murmuring conversations turned to thoughts of evening plans. Behind me, one of the Sheffielders remembered that he still had 2 pork pies in his bag. The men silently munched them before one spoke for us all. "Do you know what, Steve?" he said. "This is exactly what Sundays were made for."
Thank you, Daniel. As ever, sharp observation, I think. You mentioned that this book, the idea for this book was born in Stornoway when you were enduring a bleak Hebridean Sunday. Why were you there?
There's a TV studio there, and I was working as a scriptwriter and researcher on a series about whiskey. So we were doing the edit on over that weekend, or some of the editing.
So were you the worse for wear then?
Probably, but certainly I wouldn't have been having any hangover pints, because you could still pretty much have to go in a hotel bar to get a drink. But it was fascinating because I'd been there. You know, everyone in here will know how beautiful it is. The Hebrides are rather, but I'd been there for some time and talked to a lot of local people, and they told me stories about Sundays, about the ferry protest, which they all remembered about 10 years before, when they'd proposed to have ferries on a Sunday, and it got really bitter. People still not speaking to each other on either side of the debate, and it had been the same when they'd allowed planes. And then once you got into those conversations, people would tell you stuff from the childhood. And I always remember a woman of about my age saying to me she really remembered on a Sunday that her granddad would come back from church or kirk and feel the back of the telly to check she hadn't been watching telly on a Sunday. You know, at the start, I was almost not disdainful of that, hopefully always respectful of the way things are, but I had that outsiders, God, this is strange view, but actually you come to respect it more because it's not just a deeply religious thing, it's a very cultural thing. And I came to admire the commitment to family on a Sunday, to doing something that isn't like the rest of the days, to stopping. I came to really admire that. So hopefully when I write about that, it's not some city slicker looking down on it, I hope. Not that I'm a city slicker, I don't know why I said that.
I was going to say, somebody who grew up in Copmanthorpe isn't a city slicker.
I don't know what slicker is. I don't know what slicker is, but I'm going to call myself one from now on.
So the subtitle of your book is Travels Through the Day of Rest. How do you decide where to go?
Yeah, good question. I always want to cover as much. It's the short books, the fish and chips one as well, compared to a novel. Say they're about 45,000 words, but I always want to try and cover as much of the UK as well. I have rules early on, so I didn't want to. I'd love to do a book about Ireland someday, but I didn't want to do an Irish Sunday. I think that's got different meanings and things. So I ruled that out and just stuck to England, Scotland, and Wales. And so there's that factor. So I draw a map and I get my activities that I want to do, that I consider Sunday activities, and I try and place them in one of these places that hopefully has a historical resonance as well. So I went to Gloucester because that's where Sunday school started. I went to Speaker's Corner in London, which has always been on a Sunday morning, to write about these riots in 1855 over several Sundays when tens of thousands of people rioted in London for the right to have things to do on a Sunday and for shops to be open, working class people. Karl Marx was there every week, and he wrote in a newspaper, "The English Revolution has started, and all because of Sundays." And so the history tells you where to go in some ways, and then a real consciousness that lots of the book takes place in the north. I can't help that. That's me, I suppose. But I always have that. I want to make sure I go to Wales and to the southwest and southeast. So that I always have this map physically that I draw and scribble out and things.
And travelling around, you use public transport all the time, presumably so you have greater interaction with people sort of doing what they do on a Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely. There's not many travel books that you'll read where they have great anecdotes from service stations or being sat alone in the car. You can't eavesdrop in the car. You can't really be nosy in the car. And you're often angry in the car, or some people are, aren't they? So it's for as long as I'm doing these type of books, I'll always be on the bus and the train where possible. So much better for colour and stories, absolutely. And yeah, I did think about that. Some people Sunday identify with going out for a drive and being stuck in traffic. That was one element. I did think of finding a really good traffic jam and writing about that. But maybe I'll do that for the sequel.
Do you think that the constraints that have been imposed on what people can do on a Sunday over time have been a tool by which the establishment has kept the lower orders in check?
Definitely, yeah, absolutely. I think the first Sunday legislation, astonishingly, was in 925. Nothing to do with Dolly Parton, but of the first time things were closed, and very much it was about the church influencing politicians and monarchy to make sure people had nothing to do but go to church and then sit in quiet contemplation of the Lord afterwards. So it absolutely created that, and those riots I mentioned happened because working class people were at work till Saturday evening. No shops were open. They didn't have larders or butlers to cook for them. They couldn't get fresh food. So when it was proposed that shops wouldn't even be allowed to open for a couple of hours on a Sunday morning, they rioted. So there's definitely an element of that. I didn't think there would be such a social class element to the story till I started researching it, but it's Britain and there always is, isn't there, I suppose.
But ironically, the trade unions were among the opponents of easing.
Absolutely, in the 90s, which we all remember, in the mid-90s when all the laws began to change, the unions were split, and I understand that because it's easy for me to wander around car boot sales and go to the cricket with my leisurely Sundays, but lots of people are working, and that created that, and they were right to try and get guarantees for shop staff back then. Yeah, absolutely.
Now I've read the book and you've visited a number of churches, and I don't think you're from a religious family, but you seem to have had what seems to me a spiritual experience in those places. Is that right?
I think that's fair. Certainly not from I think the only time we went to church was for Cubs. And, cause you used to get a straw in the jar and you got a prize at the end. So that was the only reason I ever went to church as a kid. But it was, I can't say I've suddenly found religion or found God or anything, but in Norham, which is right on the border with Scotland in Northumberland, I went on Easter Sunday, and it was just the most beautiful thing. I think, it helped that the sun was shining through the stained glass windows and colouring everything so prettily. But there's something about, in this modern age, an hour where no one's on the phones and people are listening, or perhaps not listening. I've written that as well. They're probably thinking, can't wait for a pint after this. But the point remains that they're sat in quiet contemplation, and I found that tremendously powerful, absolutely. And then went down to, just near Newport, to a little village, Llangibby, that's Welsh, to an empty church, and just sat and thought about the thick quiet of a church. It's a different type of quiet. It's almost got an atmosphere to it. It's powerful. I went there because they had a mural still from about 600 years ago called a Christ of the Trades, or a Sunday Christ. When they rediscovered this, there are a few of them around, especially in the southwest and in Wales, and they're Christ on the ground, and ropes are attached to him, and at the end of the ropes are like a hammer and anvil, a sporting thing of some sort, a book of some sort. And when they looked, they thought it was a celebration of trades and things, they called it. But when they looked closely, each of these was wounding Christ. It was cutting into him, because the message was, if you do anything else on a Sunday, it kills the Lord all over again. And they're always at the door when you walked in, so just a reminder, don't do anything this afternoon, whatever you do. So I hope you feel guilty for coming to this.
On the issue of religion, it's fair to say that a lot of the way that we experience Sundays is historically governed by Christianity. Obviously Catholic pre-Reformation, Protestant post-Reformation. But in the book, you don't really touch on any other faiths. Was that a conscious decision to do that?
Absolutely. I always try and write about what I know, because I can't. I think I have to feel it, and I think it would show if I wrote about the Jewish Sabbath, which of course I mentioned is the Saturday, but it fascinates me, but it should be written by someone who feels it, I think. Yeah. And you've got your constraints as well of what to pick and what to write about. But yeah, one of my favourite football books was called "Does Your Rabbi Know You're Here?" all about Jewish footballers and football fans and things. And that I read that at the time I was doing this book, and that reinforced my view that I have to be able to really know the experience to write about it, and I can't. I just think that'd be my take on it. I can't do it in an academic, comprehensive way either. So yeah, there are many. These are my Sundays, I suppose. Yeah. What I always hope with these books is, the fish and chips one as well. You read it and you think about your fish and chip memories or your favourite chippy or whatever. They're a jumping off point for your own thoughts and your own Sundays and your own religion or experience.
But on that topic, really, you do mention in the book COVID and the effect COVID had, but it made every day feel like Sunday. But COVID had other effects, did it not? In that it kind of gave people, once the restrictions were lifted, it gave people a chance to do activities, and sometimes they did activities which maybe they didn't do before. And one thing that I experienced, and this is purely anecdotal, is in the Dales there was an awful lot more Asian people out on a Sunday once COVID restrictions were lifted than I'd seen before. Do you think that is something which, obviously you wouldn't want to write about it, but do you think it's a fair comment?
I did consider writing about it. I got in contact with sort of, I think it was called an ethnic minorities walking group anyhow, because I'm I've written quite a bit about the countryside in there. I went to recreate the Kinder trespass in the Peak District, because that took place on a Sunday, and it was about a worker's right to have some walking to do on a Sunday. So I'm very conscious of that, and I think there has been a slow change, but it's saddening and of why people feel excluded from the countryside like that, because the very point of the Kinder trespass was to say we own this. The landlord doesn't. No one owns this. This is nature. It should be everyone's. So I'm glad of that effect. So I agree with you, actually. Slowly. Yeah.
And of course, the Kinder trespass did take place on a Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a gift to me when you're choosing somewhere to go.
Yes.
You're doing your dates and you're thinking, get in. It was a Sunday. I'll shoehorn that in. I mean, growing up here, I'm more a North York Moors person, but to go to the peaks, wow, just what a privilege. I enjoy walking on my own, actually. I know it's supposed to be a bit of a social thing for people, but being up there on your own on top of the world like that among the heather and the curlews, and it's just magical.
In the book, you mention a number of politicians historically who seem to have this desperate fear of a continental Sunday. And I think even Jack Warner of Dixon of Dock Green fame, he expressed similar sentiments.
Yeah.
And yet, the continental Sunday seems, even now, more like an old Sunday than ours does.
Absolutely. That was a surprise to me some years ago, being on a stag do in Germany, and on the Sunday everything being closed. And now when I go to football abroad, how much quieter it is in Spain and France on a Sunday. But yes, from Victorian times right through to the 60s, there was this sort of moral panic from people that we'd get these continental Sundays or Paris Sundays. Gladstone, for one, was very frightened of them. William Wilberforce was really scared of a foreign Sunday. He was a big campaigner to have everything closed all the time. And they had this vision, whether it was true or not, that it's an anti-Catholic thing, I dare say, as well, that the Sundays in Paris and Madrid were debauched. They were drinking, dancing, and who knows what else afterwards. And if we should have that here, God knows what would happen. And there were politicians and others saying the French Revolution happened because they're all messing about on a Sunday, and things would break down if we did that. And just incredible. If we dared have a pint on a Sunday, we'd have a revolution by last of the summer wine. And it's just it fascinates me that the way these moral panics have always gone on, I suppose. And they would make up the groups like the Lord's Day Observance Society would make up rumours and say there are many more stabbings in Madrid on a Sunday than other days, and all of these things. And really, really nasty points as well. So the Tay Bridge rail disaster and the London to Brighton rail disaster both happened on a Sunday by coincidence. And the Lord's Day Observance Society and other campaigners said, oh, you know what that is? That's because they went on a train on a Sunday. They're all dead because they went on a train. When you read the proclamations of Trump and people, you think we've come back a bit to those random assertions. But yeah, amazing to weaponise something like that.
Obviously, throughout your travels, you met an awful lot of people. Were there any particularly memorable characters who you met?
You've spoken about the few at the cricket. That's a great opportunity to be. Let's be honest. Doing a travel book comes from a desire to have a neb and be quite nosy, and I blame Cotmanthorpe for that. If you grow up in a village, you get these skills. But so definitely the cricket was brilliant for that. And I think a lot about Speaker's Corner, because when I was a kid, I loved it because it was very political, and there'd be communists shouting at Tories, but it's very, very religious and very, very angry now, like a sort of a Twitter in real life type thing. And so I think about a lot of those characters, not necessarily in a good way, because I wonder how we got so angry and why they felt so angry. And yeah, I think it's more the people I talk to people, obviously I do, I'm polite, but I don't go around going, what do you think about Sundays? I tend to sort of listen in, which is probably bad, but that's just the way I've always done it.
So one final question from me. We tend to be people of routine. We're all people of routine, I think, by and large. Do you have a Sunday routine? I
try my best. I buy a Sunday newspaper, Sunday Times, and I feel quite sort of anxious if I don't get it. And I know there aren't many of us left, but I fell for Sunday papers working in W.H. Smith's in York Station as a teenager. I used to have to start the shift really, really early, but I just felt like I had the news on my hands, physically, the print before anyone else knew the news. I felt I had the football scores before everyone else. I loved putting the segments together and looking at all the different papers, and I maintain that now. And certainly not my age, I don't have many friends that read physical papers still, but so that's a massive, massive part of my day. Ironically, I found out W.H. Smith himself hated Sunday opening and campaigned an awful lot, and I thought, well, he didn't mind employing me, he was dead, but... So that's the absolute staple in my Sunday, and then I will try and do something that we wouldn't do on any other day of the week. The grand day out involving a flask and sandwiches in foil is important, if possible. And I'll try very, very hard not to work, and I'll try very extra hard not to check my emails, because Monday just creeps in it. Technology allows Monday to infringe more than ever, I think. Yeah. And I'll end up probably late at night watching Bullseye on Challenge TV. Because as Jim says at the end, it wouldn't be Sunday without a bit of bully.
Well, on that note, let's throw the room open to questions from the audience. We've got a roving microphone here, so if anybody would like to ask Daniel a question, fire away.
Hello.
Hello.
I've volunteered, or still volunteer, at the Festiniog Railway in North Wales. So probably about 40 years I've been volunteering there. And we were always very, very busy on a Sunday because up until the late 90s to early 2000s, it was dry in North Wales. And the Festiniog Railway had its own licence because it was run as a private railway. So you can imagine all the locals piled on. We had to stock the beers up because that's what they did. And I can't remember whether it was every 3 or 5 years there would be a vote on, whether it still remained dry. And I've seen many years of it, only just missed it again. Only just missed it again. And then when it did happen, no more votes. No more votes. So it is not dry anymore. So that affected the Festiniog because everywhere's open now. But I just wondered if you come across any more stories like that.
Yeah, absolutely. The three countries of Wales, England, Scotland all had different licensing laws and examples like that. In fact, I was doing an event in Edinburgh recently, and a man in his 90s stood up to say that they could only drink in hotels if they were bona fide travellers, so you'd have to go outside of Edinburgh and register in this book. And he said the list of names would say Mickey Mouse, Adolf Hitler, all of the names. And another old man stood up and said, God, I remember this so well. But a great Welsh example was in Cardiff in the 1870s, dock workers and railway workers that read the rules that a club could open on a Sunday. So they dug in sort of pit stone areas, a disused quarry type thing where they were lower down because people would come and watch them drinking. They made their own club, and hundreds used to go every Sunday, and you each put a penny in on this sheet in the middle, and then you bought beer with it because it wasn't a pub if you did that. And the law couldn't do anything about it for ages because it was technically a gentleman's club. So there was these brilliant examples of ingenuity to get around it. But yeah, I remember that in the mid-90s that the Royal Oak in Cottonmouth closed for a few hours, and it's very recent history, isn't it? But plenty of those ingenious ways and hatches and people serving from jugs and all of the rest. People had to get their way around it.
Yeah. I can certainly remember temporary membership of the Catholic club in Holyhead. Again, when Wales was dry, and they were quite happy to welcome temporary members just for Sunday night. Most of whom were English, I hasten to add. Anyway, any more questions? Anyone else?
You were talking about Sunday really coming from the Christian faith, pre-Christian, so pagan, druids, whatever. Did you do any sort of research? Is there much you can find out about that?
There isn't actually.
There's not much written, I suppose.
No, it's a really good question, but again, it's that thing of having your limit, I suppose, because there probably are studies to be done of that. But no, I'd be fascinated to know when.
Obviously something like Lewis, and you've mentioned. Because we passed through Lewis and Orkney, and you've got a lot of stone circles there. There's a lot of Neolithic stuff. So obviously it's very powerful there, and the church was very keen to stop that. And the Romans did something similar, where they basically took the pagan festivals and turned them into their own. And the church did the same with Easter and with Christmas.
Yeah.
So they took Yule and what was the Easter one? Eostre, which became Easter, which was the pagan festival. So it's quite interesting that the church, the control the church had, and what you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so early on. No, that's really interesting, and I would be interested to know when the first person to say don't do that was.
Whether how the days were done, because everything would have been done on the seasons and the daylight and everything, because they could grow crops or the sun and the moon were much more important in terms of pagan things. But Sunday would have presumably just come out of Christian church.
Yeah, very interesting.
I don't know what the Romans did, for example.
No, really interesting area, but no, not. I sort of had that limit of thinking 925 sounds about right, and then and then going from there and just fast. The law. We talk about the laws, probably rightly negatively, but very eccentric, enjoyable laws as well. Like I kept coming across reference to various monarchs banning leaping and vaulting and jumping on a Sunday, but they kept having to do it again and again. And I thought, what was everyone doing? What do you mean? Was people just jumping into church? And why did it offend people so much that they were jumping? And eventually there was a ban on jumping during church service hours, but you could leap and vault at other times around that. And then in I think was it 1780 or maybe earlier, that for a while it was compulsory for men and boys to wear wool hats on a Sunday. And you just see these lines in academic books, and the academics don't make any jokes or any reference. They just put it as fact. I think, hang on, you can't just say that. That's brilliant. Why do we have to wear hats? It's superb, just very the British sort of eccentricity in the lawmaking.
So did you find out why they were
The woolen hats one was to promote the woolen industry to each other, presumably. I don't know. It's a good trick, isn't it? Yeah. So this went on for the sports that were banned and seen as fine. Various animal baiting was fine, but football was very, very evil. For the early games of football were banned again and again. Cricket was allowed a lot because the game of the clergy and all of the rest. A lot of corruption in it all.
So anyone else? Any more questions?
Just picking up on that point about not being allowed to run or jump on a Sunday. Did your research come across any similar episodes like Eric Liddell, the great Scottish athlete, who refused to run on a Sunday and put at risk his Olympic ambitions? Yeah,
and it was the 100th anniversary of that while I was writing it, actually. But yeah, plenty, even as late as the 70s when there was trials in playing football on a Sunday, which was because of the power shortages. The only day some industrial towns had electricity for the floodlights and things was a Sunday, so there was some football in the 70s, and there were quite a few players, particularly I remember a Scottish goalkeeper at Swindon Town that refused to play, so there was quite a lot of it in sport, yeah. So they were the main ones that come to mind through football, and that was a very unpopular thing with the church, and there were protests at matches with banners saying, that all sorts of hell would be let loose on the football fan who pushed the turnstile on a Sunday. But within the game as well, Brian Clough said if there's football on a Sunday, I won't be there. I thought he was just taking some sort of Christian stance, but in retrospect, it's probably because he was drinking whiskey, isn't it?
Any more questions?
Thank you. From all the research you've done and all the wonderful stories you've come up with, I'm guessing there's no way you could fit all of that in the book. Are we already on the sequel? How did you choose what to put in?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's always more to do, more that comes out, more, when you do an event, people tell you stories and it leads you down that path. So I never say never to revisiting things, but the honest truth is, in my line of work, you write the books that the publisher will pay you for, and that's terribly not. You just should admit that that's the truth of it. So you'd have to leave a gap if you were to try and do it again. But yeah, there's plenty more. I'd like to write about an Irish Sunday and the Continental Sunday as well. I think would be more interesting than retracing.
Anyone else? Right at the back.
Thanks. If we went back to the Sunday trading laws before, we had all the supermarkets open, do you think that would help independent businesses if they were allowed to stay open, or would we just give Sunday to Amazon?
I think that's a great idea, actually. Now that you mention it, I think there was probably room for some more creative lawmaking like that, and let's make it the day of the independent record store and bookshop, and that's a great idea. Let's go and protest. It's funny, isn't it? Because I wouldn't want any real Sunday laws, despite talking about my sadness at the loss of a traditional Sunday. I just think it's down to personal choice, and we should have more. But because I do remember, as I've mentioned about Copmanthorpe, but when a lift was available into town, you'd get quite excited and think, oh yes, and then you'd go and Main News was open, I always remember, so you could go and look at the magazines there for 10 minutes, and then there's nothing else to do. So I'm never that fond of it. But there was room to be more creative, definitely. But it did, yeah. The shop laws were really, really interesting in themselves when I went into them, because they kept adding caveats. There was these times when, for instance, in the 70s, you could sell pornographic magazines, but you couldn't sell Bibles. And there was all of these examples that I came across of things that were in tins were fine, that weren't fine fresh. Just mad.
Any more questions?
Do you think Sundays are better now? Sorry. Do you think Sundays are necessarily better now? I mean, I'm in my 70s now, so I've experienced a lot. I don't necessarily think now is better.
No.
Because of everyone wants free Sundays, but a lot of it is commercial. And also people, yes, there was a lot of laws 50 years ago, but family was a focus on a Sunday. And there are a lot of lonely people around. And I don't think, the same with football, there's that much commercial football now. It's not special anymore.
I
And
think
pubs with
yeah.
3 hours on an evening and 2 at lunchtime, it was a special occasion.
Yeah.
Whereas now, it's the norm.
Yeah.
I don't think they're necessarily special anymore.
No.
And you can get fed up with it.
Yeah, I agree with you about football completely. And then, and on the other point, actually, I think there's a balance to be struck, isn't there? I'm glad, as I say, there's more available to do, but it doesn't necessarily mean we should be racing around as usual, like on every other day of the week. And I have found that reaction with doing the book. You know, when I do local radio, they often make it the topic, what do you do on a Sunday? And there's a lot of people saying, well, we're trying our best to have the roast, to have the family over for the roast when we can get them and we can book them in. And so I do think I think people have realised that, to try, because it is out there if you want it. You know, the cricket's out there, the countryside's out there, the roast dinner's out there, the Toby Carvery's open. But I agree with you. There was probably a tipping point. It's good that things are open, but try and keep some of what was before as well. Yeah, but I do think I'm a positive person. I do think you can still make a Sunday what you want it to be. You know, I've had some great Sundays in this city recently with my mum, just going around a few different pubs, trying a few different ales and doing nothing. You know, that's a great Sunday, really great Sunday. If she doesn't mind me ignoring me reading my paper half the time, then it's fine.
Any more? Right, that seems like we've come to the end of questions. So I'd just like to thank Daniel for a really interesting, fascinating talk, and for answering my questions and your questions. And I'm sure a lot of you will be keen to get hold of this particular volume, and it's you can get it from our independent bookseller down in the foyer, and Daniel will sign books down there for a few minutes now. And so if you want to have a chat to Daniel, he'll be down there for a while now. And at the end of all that, enjoy your Sunday.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.